I'm very excited. I brought an incredible guest with us today that I know is going to blow your mind. I saw him speak at SaaS Academy, a couple of months ago, and I was like, this is somebody who needs to talk to the people in my world. So I'm really excited for this. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Kyle Van Voris. I've built over 70 B2B software and service sales teams and have helped, over 100 million in sales at this point across those companies. Of our venture-backed clients we've worked with, they've raised over 280 million. I've written 3 books on sales. One's called Cold to Committed. That's on doing cold outreach. The other's called the Sales Development Framework. And then the most recent one is called 16 Steps to Repeatable Sales. I've been in SDR cold calling. I've been a sales rep. I've been running teams. I've been in board meetings while things are going great. I've been in board meetings while things are definitely not going great. So I've seen every part of the sales process and also the journey of scaling a company. I know how difficult it is. And the lens that I see the world through is that if we can be a lot more data-driven with our sales teams, should be one of the most data-driven parts of the organization. If we can do that, then it gives us full clarity into what levers we can pull to improve the performance of the team and actually scale and build real strong sales processes. And that's why I'm very excited to introduce Victor Cheng here, who I saw speak at a SaaS Academy event a couple of months ago, all around being data-driven across the entire organization. And when him and I were chatting offline after his talk, he was talking to me a lot about this gap between founder and CEO. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Victor here. Victor, welcome.
Thanks, Kyle.
Okay, perfect. No, I'm really excited about this, Victor, because I've coached hundreds of founders at this point through my work with SaaS Academy and also privately. And this is such a big component. I can tell you that the founders I struggle the most with their sales are typically the ones that struggle with the leadership component in general, not just the sales part. There we go. Beautiful.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
All right, take us away.
So today I want to talk about really sort of 3 key skill gaps that I've noticed that founders typically have in their transition to grow into a professional CEO. And so I want to talk a little bit about my background first to give you some sense of perspective of where I come from. So I run an executive coaching company called SaaSCEO.com. As you might imagine from the name, we focus on mentoring and developing the skills of CEOs in the SaaS industry. I've been in SaaS for probably 25 years before it was ever called SaaS. I've written a couple books. The one related to SaaS is called Extreme Revenue Growth. Started off my career at McKinsey, helping CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. So in that world, small businesses like 500 million in sales. Right? Sort of done everything in SaaS from product management, product marketing. Was a very bad software developer 30 years ago. I mostly focus on strategy, growth, the go-to-market side of things, which is where I share in common with Kyle, as well as private equity, M&A, and sort of board work. So everything's sort of the front of the house I'm pretty familiar with and have a particular perspective that I'm going to share today. So I want to talk about founder skills versus CEO skills. They are actually quite different. Sometimes you hear the term founder CEO, like the CEO that was also the founder of the company, or founder and CEO. And I think of them as 2 different skill sets. Sometimes the 2 skill sets can be managed by and delivered by the same person. Sometimes there is more of a relay race where the founder passes the baton to maybe a professional CEO. Right, someone who was hired in to be CEO, but did not found the company. And so I want to kind of characterize what these 2 different sets of skills look like, and then talk about the major gaps and how to close them. Right? So what founders are very good at is being really visionary, being innovative, being passionate, being frugal. What CEOs are much better at are what I call scale relevant skills. Right, so managing 100 employees is very different than managing 3 employees. Having a lot more structure, having a lot more discipline. Right? So those are kind of at a high level what we're looking at. And what I want to talk about is 3 specific skills that founders really need to grow into and rise into the occasion of being a CEO. So number 1, and Kyle alluded to this, data-driven decision-making. If you're a professional CEO, you are looking at data constantly. You are doing math every single day to make better decisions. The second is implementing and standardizing scalable business processes. I'll talk a lot more about what I mean by that. And then the third is disciplined execution. Okay? So a lot of these things, quite candidly, I think most of the founders I work with find quite boring, right? These are the things they don't want to do, which is why I became an entrepreneur, Yet ironically, if you're very successful as an entrepreneur and founder, you end up having a business that really needs a CEO to guide it and take it to the next step. So let's talk about the first area around data-driven decision-making. So that's the first skill that you need to develop. Founders typically are very visionary, they're very intuitive, they're very opportunistic, right? They see what's not there, right? So you look at a marketplace, there's no data, right? There's no products, there's no offering. It's a very emerging market. And from a blank piece of paper, right, the founder can see something that others cannot see. So they see what's possible and they're able to notice opportunities, achieve them. And a lot of the decision-making really is based on intuition and gut. Right? And in many cases, the founders are used to be working in the role that would now be the customer's role. So it would be someone that builds a product for themselves, really, and then finds that others are interested. That's a pretty typical founder story. CEOs are quite different in their skill set and their outlook. First of all, they're very, very pragmatic. They're much more data-driven and they're strategic. Pragmatic means really getting the day-to-day things done. Right? As the business grows, as there's more customers, as there are more employees, the complexity of managing a larger organization gets a lot more complicated. And so getting simple things done that you used to be able to do yourself, but now you got to get it done through 100 employees, very, very different skill set. Strategic refers to being, having strategy really is making a plan to get your outcome, right? That's what strategy is. And I think good strategy is reflective of trade-offs. So CEOs have to make a lot of trade-offs. When you're an established business, if you do something to acquire new customers, you might have to distract and take away resources from existing customers. When you have no customers, when you're starting up, there are no trade-offs, right? Everything is all upside, no downside. Very different as the business matures. The other difference is CEOs are in spreadsheets constantly. And so that's the one thing that's very common with the quote-unquote professional CEO is they are very heavily into spreadsheets. So I'll give you a little example. I had a client of mine that was a classic entrepreneur founder, owner of, I think, 4 or 5 companies and a different number of companies every time I would talk to him. And so I remember this one phone call I had with them. We were talking about all these other startups, the smaller companies. And at the very end, the last 10 minutes, he goes, oh, by the way, I have this company also that has about 10 million a year in sales. Right? I'm like, oh, we didn't talk about that the entire time. Well, tell me more about this business. So he told me a little bit more about the business. And I asked, what is your net revenue retention, right? So for the customers you acquired a year ago, how much money are they spending today, right? Inclusive of upsells and cross-sells. And he didn't know. I'm like, okay, well, go figure it out. Here's the formula. You can Google the formula if you want, and go figure out what net revenue retention is. So, and then email me. Right? So he emails me back and he says, net revenue retention is 140%, right? And so he's like, okay, whatever. I just did the homework. I'm done. Right? And he finds this business incredibly boring, right? It's not innovative. It's not exciting. There's no challenge. There's no chaos. He thrives on the possibilities, right? So I take that number. Instantly, I recognize its significance because I've done the math so often. And I ran a quick calculation. And what I realized was this business was going to be a $100 million a year business inside of 10 years and probably worth somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion, right? In roughly about 8 years. And so I emailed them back and said, hey, do you realize that you are running a unicorn business, right? A business that has the potential to be over $1 billion in enterprise value. He had no clue that his net worth was on pace to be $500 million to $1 billion, right? Within the decade. No idea. And so this is where a CEO would spot that immediately, run the math, run the numbers, and go, oh, this is a huge opportunity. Right? And so what we ended up doing was we stopped working on the other 4 businesses that are all under $1 million in sales. We really put all his effort on this big one. And this thing is growing like gangbusters, right? He had a great thing, but didn't quite realize. All right, so here one of my list, sort of 5 spreadsheets that I find CEOs typically use that founders typically do not. Right? So I'll sort of list them for you. First is a sales funnel stage report, right? So if you have a sales process, which you should as you mature, you want to know, well, how many phone calls did our team make today or this week? How many sales meetings do we have? How many demos do we deliver this day, this week, this month, this quarter? Right? So at a glance, a CEO would need to know that. Right? The second thing a professional CEO would have is what I call a sales funnel conversion rate report. So that is, for example, for what percentage of the demos we give goes on to the next sales stage, such as proposals, right? So maybe it's 1 in 3, So for every 3 demos, we get 1 proposal. Maybe every 2 proposals, we get 1 closed deal. Right? Those sort of ratios or those percentages, depending on how you like to represent the numbers, is really important to understand the go-to-market side of the business. Right? From a strategic standpoint, LTV versus CAC ratio. So this is the lifetime value of a customer divided by their customer acquisition cost and the ratio between the two. And what we find is that more sophisticated businesses know what the LTV to CAC ratio is for the company overall, and you might know what that is for your company overall. But the more sophisticated companies know what the LTV to CAC ratio is by customer acquisition cohort. So all the customers acquired this month versus last month versus a year ago. By customer segments, if you serve multiple verticals, if you serve financial services, you serve manufacturing, what is the LTV to CAC ratio for each of those different verticals? If you serve customers through multiple sales channel, right? Maybe through outbound cold calling, through partnerships and referrals, what is the LTV to CAC ratio for each of those particular channels? And how do you generate leads? If you generate leads through SEO, what's the LTV to CAC ratio for those particular prospects versus inbound marketing versus outbound cold calling versus trade shows? Many different ways to acquire a customer. And the reason is this tells you where the opportunities are, right? And this is what CEOs do. They do the math, they do the calculations, and they figure out where are you going to get the most bang for the buck in terms of your operating budget. Okay. 2 other things, churn rates also, that's sort of really contributes to lifetime value by those same slices, by cohort, customer segment, channel, and lead source. And then the 5th one, and this is usually for businesses a little bigger, so I would say maybe 5 to 10 million in sales and above, is a financial forecasting model, a growth model. So if you have a good sales process and it's really consistent and you know your numbers really well, then it comes time to grow, right? So if you were to want to increase sales by 5 or 10 million in ARR, how much money would you need to fund the sales and marketing effort? And there's a financial calculation spreadsheet that would be able to tell you that. And the key thing here is when you see businesses that maybe over 10 million in sales, you see a lot of what I would call activity ratios per employee. So an SDR, how many phone calls or cold outreaches can an SDR make in a given day, right? There's usually a number for businesses that are well measured and really run by the numbers. There's a number that is the target. There's a number for how many proposals and demos a particular AE can handle, right? And as you scale, trying to go from, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in your sales team to, say, 20, 50, 60, or 80, or 100, right, at the very upper end, these ratios become important. So every time you hire 7 sales SDRs, you need to hire 1 sales manager, right, or 1 SDR manager. So all those calculations around translating revenue into staffing requirements into the amount of activity those staff will do, it helps you figure out, do you have enough resources to make the number you're trying to reach?
I have a quick question here, Victor.
Yeah, sure.
And I feel like, in my experience, some of these reports the founder might have, and then some of them they don't, and then vice versa. And it almost is like a personality test of the founder. Like, some founders are like much more finance oriented.
Yes.
Some are much more sales oriented. I'm curious if you see that too. And then also, like, how do you branch out past that? Because I imagine that's a hard habit to break, to go from like where you're comfortable to also checking some of these other reports.
Yeah, so there's having the report, and then there's understanding the report, and then there's using the report to make better decisions. So I would distinguish between those 3. So I do see a lot of CEOs or founders who have the report, but they don't know how to interpret it. They're not making better decisions because of it. They're kind of glancing at it and goes, "Oh, it's the same as last week. We're probably okay." Right? I think there is a shift. If someone comes from more of a CFO background, they're going to look a lot more at LTV versus CAC and churn rates. And most founders are not typically come from a CFO background. Technical founders, they don't look at any of this, right? It's like, if sales are down, we need more features, right? Every single problem in the business can be solved by more features. That's kind of their bias. Someone that's very sales oriented tends to look at some of the first 2 reports in terms of driving activity in sales, but they tend not to look at profitability, right? So yeah, you closed a deal, but is the customer still here a year later? Well, I don't know. I just close deals. That's what I've been doing for my entire career. I close deals. Yeah, but do they stay as customers or do they leave 3 months later? So things like LTV versus CAC, churn rate, those are things that typically sales executives are not historically held accountable for, and certainly not salespeople. And so they tend not to look at those, but that's where the enterprise value is driven by, is both the number of new customers, how much they spend, and how profitable they are, largely depend on how long they stay as a customer. So I would say there definitely is a bias depending on the person's background. All right, so let's talk about the second skill. So the second skill is around implementing standardized, scalable processes, right? So this is like, it's like the one slide that has 3 words that nobody really wants to deal with. Standardization, scalability, and processes. That's pretty boring, but man, does it make a big difference in terms of being able to grow. So I'm gonna talk about what I mean by that. And so if you look at the mental orientation of how a founder thinks about getting work done versus a CEO, it is night and day different, right? So founders are typically, just get it done. I don't care how you do it, as long as it works, as long as it's effective, doesn't matter, let's just get it done, right? And when you're, say, under, when you're a single employee, absolutely, just get it done, right? Under 5, probably the same thing. As you get bigger, that is the worst approach, is to just get it done, because it doesn't work when you have 20, 50, 100, 500 employees, right? It becomes increasingly important that every single employee that's involved in a particular business process, maybe generating leads, maybe onboarding customers, maybe doing technical support calls, every single employee with every single instance of activity and work, they need to do it the exact same way, right? So a lead is generated via cold calling the exact same way, regardless of which SDR does it. A new customer is onboarded in the exact same way, regardless of which person in customer success is involved in that, right? Standardization becomes extremely important because you can't scale beyond a certain point without it. So let me give you some sense of how do you, some definitions and then some metrics you can use to sort of assess your own processes. So a process really is a sequence of steps, right, that are consistent and standardized to produce a particular result that is also consistent. So think of a recipe. If you follow the recipe exactly every single time, you get what you want out of it, right? So you bake a cake, you follow the exact same steps every single time, you get the exact same cake every single time. If you wing it, if you change the ingredients, you change the baking temperature, you change the baking time, you're not going to get consistent results. Okay? So that's what a process is, particularly a standardized process. Now, a scalable process sort of built upon that. So it's a scalable process is also a standardized recipe, if you would, that produces consistent results. But it's one that as you double and triple the budget, either in dollars or headcount, the performance still works. So if you were to double the spending on sales and marketing, does your new bookings and new deals double? If you triple the spend on sales and marketing, do the number of new deals double or triple? Okay? And sometimes you have processes that don't scale. A very common one is referrals, right? Referrals are great source of customers. They tend to have very good lifetime value. They tend to be easy to sell. But the problem is you can't triple your referral budget, right? You can't add 3 more people to the referral team and get 3 times as many referrals, right? It doesn't scale beyond a certain point. So here are a couple processes that hopefully should be standardized. So lead generation. So are you doing SEO the same way every single time? Are you doing cold calling, outbound cold outreach the same way every single time? When you hold a sales meeting, like a discovery meeting or whatever term you want to use, is every salesperson doing the sales meeting the exact same way every single time? Either literally identical or following an identical process, right? Maybe they're getting specific data from the customer to customize the sales presentation, but what questions they're asking is standardized. When they ask it is standardized. What they do with it is also standardized. Right? Product demos, right? There is a better way to do a product demo. So if you get 10 people to do a product demo, I guarantee you one of them will have more of their audiences convert into the next sales stage than others. Right? So you figure out what's the person who demos the best, what are they doing, and how do we get everyone to do the exact same thing? Same with customer onboarding, upsells, and renewals. So every sort of step, particularly in go-to-market, because things are so measurable on the go-to-market side, everything should ideally be done the exact same way, regardless of who is doing it. That's the key message here.
Can I ask a quick question here, Victor?
Yeah, sure.
This is just a curiosity of mine. What I find when it comes to these standardized processes that become very scalable, one of the big attractive parts of having a really strong outbound process is it's fairly scalable. Same with
Yes.
like a lot of the marketing stuff. Partner channels are an interesting one to me because sometimes it seems like companies are able to scale that incredibly well. And then other times it's like the brick wall that you just can't get through. And I'm just curious from your experience, where do you put partner channels in this kind of matrix of scalability?
Yeah, so it depends on how good the strategic fit is with the partner. If the strategic fit is really good, then you treat it much more like a sales force, right? You can have a standardized process. I have a couple of clients where they're really good at big partnerships and getting hundreds of new customers through partners. Right? And what I mean by good fit is, do you help your partner make a lot of money, right? So think about this. Let's say your partner is SAP, okay? Big company. They land $10 million deals, right? But maybe they're missing a feature or capability that they don't have in-house. And their customers are saying, I won't sign that contract for $10 million unless you have this capability, right? So what's happening is, and you happen to your company happens to provide that capability. So what happens is when you are partnering with SAP in that particular example, you are helping them solve a $10 million problem, right? Whatever you do, doesn't matter what it is, probably nowhere close to 10 million, but you're allowing that salesperson to get a commission check on a $10 million deal. Okay? That process can be very standardized. If you're pretty minor and you make no difference to the partner, in fact, involving you in a deal jeopardizes the deal and doesn't give them any benefit, then that's a very hard thing to standardize because there's no actual value. The value isn't big enough for there to be a draw from the partner. And if there's not enough draw and interest, then the processes typically don't matter much because there's just no demand, right? Or demand so low it's inconsequential.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if you sell through partners, I'd love to see you comment in the chat so I have a sense of how common that is. Because I see a lot more people with the desire to build out these partner channels. And what you said there, which I think is a powerful one, is I mean, maybe I'm extrapolating a little bit, but you're almost going down to the individual sales rep. Is this enabling the sales rep to close a deal they otherwise would not have closed? Or are you hoping that the sales rep brings you into a deal to bring you into a deal? You know, like maybe they get a little bit more comp for it, but enabling them to close a large deal is probably a lot more powerful than them adding an extra, 10, 20 grand to an existing deal.
Yeah, I would say it's both at the individual rep level and senior management. So if senior management, if the head of sales missed their quota by 100 million because they're missing this capability, and they go talk to R&D, and R&D says, well, we'll have it in 3 years, right? Like, well, I need to make quota now. They're going to push that a lot harder. So it has to work both at the high level and at the feet at the street level. And so I've seen partnerships, close to 30 years now. Most of them fail, right? And what happens is at the senior levels, it makes sense. Oh yeah, you have this, we have that. It makes a lot of sense on the slideshow, and then nothing happens, right? Because it doesn't add enough value on the feet at the street level. So it's got to be both for it to work well.
Yeah, great insight. Thanks. I'll let you continue.
So this is like a little scorecard I have, and no need to write it down. For those of you that want, I'll send you this particular slide as a handout. So I have something called a process maturity scorecard. And this is a way to sort of rate or grade how sophisticated or how advanced are your processes. Okay? So here's how it works. Think of a process, outbound cold calling, right, let's say. So you want to look at these 6 factors. How consistent are your results when you have an outbound cold calling team? And if your process is pretty immature, it's going to be hit or miss. Some people do well, others do terribly. It's all over the place, right? If your results are very consistent, every single last year does within a particular range, give yourself 1 point. Okay, that's a mature process. Second is person dependency, right? Does getting results out of cold calling depend on who's cold calling, right? If it's you cold calling or you closing a deal or you doing a demo, do you get better results than other people? So if the results depend on who's doing it, that's person dependent. That's an immature process. If it doesn't matter who's doing it, that's person independent. So if you go to McDonald's, it doesn't really matter who's making the burger in the back. The burger is the quality level that's been promised. If you go to any Starbucks anywhere in the world, you ask for a latte, right? You're going to get a very consistent latte. It doesn't matter who's on shift that particular day. So if you're more like McDonald's and you're more like Starbucks in terms of your go-to-market SDR process, give yourself 1 point. Step 3 is documentation. Every process in your company should ideally have documentation. Right? If it doesn't, that's an immature process because it means the know-how for how to do something is in somebody's head. Often it's the founder, particularly in small businesses. If it's fairly well documented, that's a much more mature process, and give yourself 1 point. Okay. New employee training. What's the new employee training model? Is it you hire a new salesperson and they sort of follow you around until they figure it out? Or do you run them through a curriculum? Do you do training tests and assessments before you allow them to talk to a customer? Okay. More like the curriculum, give yourself a point. How much skill level does one need to do something in your company? Okay. If in order to do an SDR outbound cold call, you have to know the product inside and out, you have to know financial analysis around the product, you have to have been in the industry 25 years at a bare minimum to have the conversation, right? The higher the skill level to do something, the more immature the process is. Right? The lower skill level you have, the more mature the process. So McDonald's hires minimum wage workers, right? And teenagers to flip burgers in the back, right? It doesn't take a really high skill level to cook food within the McDonald's because they have a process and a system. So again, if the skill level is lower skill, give yourself 1 point. And finally, decision-making. How do decisions get made? If decisions are largely tied to one person, typically you, the founder, right? Then that's a more immature decision-making process. If the majority of decisions get made based on policies, decision-making guidelines, criteria, checklists, where you've taken how you make decisions and you've distilled it into a process, a flow chart, or a checklist, that's a much more mature process. And that means a lot more decisions can be made at scale much more easily. So if that sounds like your organization, give yourself 1 point. So professional CEOs are really sort of in that sort of, I would say 4, 5, 6 range, right? So whatever your process is that you're thinking about, if it's really well run by somebody that's used to scale, they're in the upper end of the scale. Most founders are probably in the 0, 1, maybe at best 2 level. And so it gives you some sense of process sophistication within your company and within your own skill set. So I'll give you an example. So I'm based out of Seattle, so the big companies here are Microsoft, Amazon, and Starbucks. And I came across this really interesting fact the other day. You know, when a SaaS company generates has an enterprise valuation of about $1 billion, which is roughly 100 million plus in sales, then that's like this big, enormous, incredible accomplishment, right? It's often referred to as a unicorn. So in the SaaS world, 100 million in revenue is like amazing. If you can pull that off in a year, like you are a hero, you're on the cover of magazines, and there's a good chance you're probably a billionaire, right? And so interesting enough, at Starbucks, they generate $100 million on Tuesday. Every Tuesday, they generate $100 million in sales globally. In fact, every Wednesday, they also do that. Like literally every day of the year, they generate over $100 million every 24-hour period throughout the year. And it's really boring. It's like really routine. 400,000 employees, all doing the exact same thing at the exact same place and the exact same level of quality across, 60, 80, 100 countries, whatever they're in these days. And it's pretty routine. They do it every day, every 24 hours. Right? So the reason that's possible is because of the process maturity. Right? To get 400,000 employees to make the latte the exact same way, right? And generate 100 million in sales every single 24 hours. It's a lot of boring processes, but boring processes are the ones that scale, make you a lot of money. So there are 3 ways you can get process maturity within your organization. So probably number 1 is hiring leaders that have process expertise. So I routinely get involved with my clients around hiring a CFO, chief revenue officer in some cases, head of customer success, VP of marketing, CMO, that kind of thing. And one of the things I often look for when I'm helping my clients do this is, do they have process expertise? So if you're heading ahead of marketing, have they run a marketing team between 5 to like 35 employees, right? Have they gone through all the headaches of managing a more complex organization? Have they run a marketing team that's within a company that starts at 5 million, gets up to maybe 50 million, right? If that's your goal. Have they gone through those growing pains? Because as businesses get bigger, they get more complicated. And you offset complexity with processes. And people who are used to a particular life stage of the company, they've typically, not all the time, but oftentimes they've learned the skill set needed to have processes needed to manage that. Right? So managing 2 software developers versus 200, totally different. Totally different. Okay? So that's the first way you can do things. The second way you can get process expertise would be the outsource. Okay, this could be outsourcing and taking your ability to do payroll, for example, right? There's a skill set needed to do payroll. There's a skill set to do taxes, right? If you don't have that expertise in-house, is it worth it to learn that? Or should you go outsource it to somebody else? Right? And so for things that are not core to the business, outsource often is a good option. And related to outsourcing would be like using advisors, right? People who, bankers, consultants, executive coaches like myself, those who have expertise around what needs to be done at a very particular stage of the company, maybe around an M&A transaction, for example, that you don't want to have all in-house because it's expensive, but you do need it at a very specific point in time, right? So you go hire a banker or someone to help you do a capital raise or to acquire a company. And the last one is to, within your internal resources, internal staff, increase the maturity of your existing processes. Okay? And so really you should be doing all three, right? So all the companies I work with that are successful, they're doing all three. They're hiring people with better process expertise, they're outsourcing non-core processes, and they're improving the in-house processes. So we'll talk a little bit how to do that. So here's 7 steps to improve process maturity. So first is identify the best performer. So you identify the best SDR who's generating the most cold calls and getting the most meetings, right? Number 2, you observe what they do. Okay, what are they doing differently to get more and better results? Step 3, you document, you write down what you notice. Step 4 is you switch everyone to the best practice way. Step 5 is you hire and train new staff to follow the new process. Step 6 is you verify that everyone is using the better and newer process. And step 7 is you experiment, try to find a different way of doing things to get a new, better performer. And then you repeat the whole process all over again. It's a pretty simple way to do this. It's so much work. It is an ungodly amount of work to do this in all the different areas of the company. But this is what management really is, at a certain size of the business. Last skill I'll wrap up on is disciplined execution. So disciplined execution really is getting things done in an orderly way, right? Not chaotic, with consistent quality, quantity, and timing. Right? So it is making things very routine. Making a really good latte at Starbucks every single time is disciplined execution, right? Consistent quality, consistent quantity, consistent timing. So here's an example of that in terms of managing disciplined execution. Looking at performance reviews or performance-related feedback. Most founders never do performance reviews, very rarely ever give feedback to their employees around improving performance. Professional CEOs will have typically weekly scorecards. Right? Every employee in the company has a grade of how well they did this week. Right? And everyone in the organization senior to that person should be able to look at that. Right? It's a very regimented way. So at Starbucks, there's a rating system. Every barista is rated. You can look at all 100,000 of them and know how well they are. Cashiers, same thing, and so on. So here are 6 steps to getting really disciplined execution in every role. Number 1, every role needs to have a goal. Right? Number 2, performance needs to be measured against the goal. This is especially necessary and much easier to do in go-to-market for sure. Right? Step 3, this is where people fall down, accountability. Right? So first of all, if there is no goal, you can't hold people accountable. If there is a goal, but you don't measure their progress, that doesn't work either. If there is a goal, you measure their progress, but then you don't do anything differently if they miss the goal, then you're lacking accountability. So these first 3 steps, I think founders are generally very, very poor at, especially in go-to-market, extremely poor. So I will see founders that have maybe 1 or 2 salespeople who've missed quota for 28 months in a row, right? I'm like, well, why are they still here? You got to do something differently, right? And the something different is number 4, troubleshooting. Why is that person missing, right? Step 5, coach them. If there's something they're not doing that they know that they could do, but they're not, you coach them, right? By the way, Starbucks has this whole process nailed down, all right? If an employee isn't working out, there's a troubleshooting process as part of a 500-page manual on how to manage a Starbucks location, and there's a coaching process. They have a very, very good coaching process. And then step 6 is to remove poor performers that aren't able to take the coaching and improve their performance. If you can do this within software development, if you can do this within finance, if you can do this within sales, do this within marketing, every key role has this level of structure and discipline, you can scale the organization and make it much bigger. And I find there's a reason why I think a lot of founders find this discipline execution very difficult. And I don't know if most of the folks listening in are from the United States, but there's an expression here in the US called working for the man, right? Man in quotes. And that really is referring to working for like the big company that's really, really annoying. And a lot of founders quit because they don't like that environment to go start their own companies. And they find themselves in a very ironic situation, which is the founders that are very successful and they have a big company, they now have to become that which they hated and ran away from, right? You have to have all this bureaucracy and structure and performance reviews needed to make a big company run. And so I think that's one of the reasons why founders typically shy away from that. So I'll wrap up and we'll do some Q&A here. So top 3 skills you got to learn to become a CEO from a founder. Number 1, data-driven decision-making. Number 2, implementing standardized scalable processes. And step 3, executing, making sure there's disciplined execution within the company. Basically, I have what I call a free CEO skills quick start kit. It's 5 documents. 1 is the list of top 5 spreadsheets that you should be using. The process maturity scorecard I referenced earlier, the checklist for doing disciplined execution. And then I have a 1-page infographic that's really good. It shows you all the different ways, like 25 different ways you can scale enterprise value, the value of your business. And it's a 1-pager and helps you figure out, okay, where do I spend my time and energy and resources to grow the company's value? So to get this free resource, just go to saasceo.com/Voris, saasceo.com/Voris. Just fill out the form, we'll email it to you and get you those resources right away.
Okay, so this wasn't really a question, but this is one that I kind of pinned so we could talk about it, which is getting accurate data due to internal systems. What recommendations, feedbacks, anything that you have around getting the most accurate data possible, even in situations where it might feel like things are pretty scattered?
Yeah, so this is probably the number 1 obstacle. Is even if you want to do all this stuff, you have to set up your systems in a way that are consistent. So I'll give you an example. I have a client that's trying to do, in the middle of doing this, they're maybe 7-8 months in, and they use Salesforce.com to manage their Salesforce, right, which is pretty common. And they have a simple field in Salesforce called industry, right? What industry is this prospect in? And when they set up Salesforce, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years ago, it was a form field. You would type in financial services, banking, insurance, right? But you can't run reports off that. You can't run an LTV to CAC ratio on insurance because everyone spelled insurance differently. Some abbreviated INS, some did lowercase, some did all caps, right? The data is inconsistent. So there is a process of getting data consistency, either going back and re-entering every single record, right, which is a complete pain, or switching to a drop-down box, right? So retail banking spelled the same way, right? And then manually going back and recalculating and recategorizing every single record into what's now in the drop-down box. So that's a really important way and process to get good data. If you can use fewer systems rather than more, that certainly helps a lot. And that's especially because, for many folks, financial data is in one system, right? Product usage data is in the app itself. Sales data in terms of sales closing rates is in a Salesforce management system. And so a lot of my clients, what they'll end up doing is they'll try to minimize the number of systems possible. And then the bigger ones will take all that data and really merge it into one database, like a data warehouse. That's much used for a much larger organization, but you can get by with just having consistency of fields. Like the customer ID should be the same across all systems. Things like that can really help make this much easier.
A good way to think about this too, just a little heuristic for those of you out there, is if you think about any field that you have in a CRM or anywhere where you're logging stuff that you may want to, or you may need to review in order to get some of the information you need. If you build that out with the lens of, can I create a pie graph of this later? That's usually a good heuristic. It doesn't work for everything, but what I find are things that you're going to want to see in a pie graph, if they're not pick list items where it's just you select which one makes the most sense, and I manually type something in, that'll never work in a pie graph because it's just going to be 1,000 little slices of the pie. So that's one of the little things that I do when I'm building something out, is I think, will I want this in like a pie graph or a bar chart? Am I going to want it in that kind of format to be able to review this easily? If so, what's the best way that I can build this to get the outcome that I want, which is to be able to see it in this way?
Yeah, most folks I work with, they end up having to use spreadsheets because there's not a better, more elegant solution. Also, I'll add one sort of tip that I wish everyone did earlier in the business. Have one customer ID, right? So you have a record in Salesforce. They make a customer ID out of that, right? Because they need it just to run Salesforce.com. But then your accounting system has a customer record too, right? And then your app, right? There's your SaaS app has a customer record in the database. If you can get all of them to be the same, or at least every database has all the others, so it's consistent, then you can merge, you can export data from all three systems, merge them together, and run reports. When you don't have that, Victor Cheng in one report is customer 123, but it's customer A624. And then there's multiple Victor Chengs, right? And maybe I change my email address. The whole thing becomes a complete mess and it's really inaccurate. So if you can get one customer ID, but you build everything around that alone, even if you don't use it, you just do that now, a year or two later, you're gonna appreciate it.
That is a huge hack. That's incredible. I've not even heard of that one. That was really good. And it makes total sense too, because like sometimes you implement a solution way down the line and you're right. Like you might have been customer 1 in HubSpot, but in their kind of back-end management tool that they're using to track your product usage, you're customer 30, and then it's just totally different. Wow, that's a good one. Victor, any parting words?
Yeah, I'd say it's, being a CEO is a learnable skill, but it is a different skill than being a founder. And so I think my message here is to be aware of it, all right, and decide if you want to tackle that transition. You don't have to, right? You can always hire somebody to do that if you're far enough along. And if you're going to just realize what you don't know and start working on it at least a little bit, right? That gives you a bit of a blueprint of where to head.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Victor. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Take care.
Take care, guys.